Have you ever stopped to think that maybe you yourself are getting in the way of your relationships? It sounds controversial, I know. But the truth is that invisible attitudes arising from fear of rejection, insecurity, and emotional dependence may be undermining your chances of being happy in love. It's not about guilt. It's about understanding how self-sabotage works silently, causing you to lose yourself in painful cycles. In this video, you'll discover the patterns that often go unnoticed, but which are the real enemies of your self-esteem and self-love. Get ready to transform your outlook and take the first steps towards healthier, truer relationships. There is a silent mistake that many women make in love relationships, putting the other person at the center of their own life. And you know, that's not love. It's emotional sabotage disguised as care. When she forgets herself, gives up her own dreams, desires, and even her own identity, without realizing it, she enters a cycle of self-sabotage which, sooner or later, generates pain, frustration, and low self-esteem. And what's worse, the other person senses this excessive surrender and, instead of valuing it, often devalues it. It's easy to see this pattern. She cancels appointments, gives up hobbies, ignores her emotional needs, and focuses only on pleasing, on being available, on not displeasing. Little by little, the internal emptiness grows. And what was supposed to be love becomes emotional dependence, emotional neediness, and constant insecurity. This toxic behavior not only burdens you emotionally, it also feeds your fear of rejection and emotional abandonment. To start breaking this cycle, she needs to ask herself, what have I been doing for myself, apart from him? Regaining self-care, strengthening self-knowledge, and nurturing your own life is the way to free yourself from this invisible prison. Becoming the protagonist of your own story again is not selfishness. It's emotional intelligence. And believe me, this not only strengthens the relationship, it completely changes the dynamic between the two of you. And speaking of dynamics, this brings us to another very delicate point, which she may not even realize, but which has been undermining her happiness in love for a long time. You know that moment when she starts to settle for little? With an effortless message, with meetings whenever it suits her, with minimal displays of affection? That's right. This is the classic portrait of someone who, often without realizing it, has learned to confuse emotional crumbs with love. And that's not love. That's anxious attachment mixed with emotional need, with fear of rejection, with that desperate desire to feel chosen, even if it's for crumbs. And look how curious. The more she accepts little, the more he gives little. It's as if she's teaching him, without knowing it, that he doesn't need to make an effort, that it's okay for her to always be there, available, waiting for any leftover affection. This destroys her self-confidence, feeds her insecurity, strengthens her emotional dependence, and of course perpetuates that old cycle of self-sabotage in love relationships. It's exhausting, and cruel. But here's a powerful twist. She needs to start asking herself, why do I accept so little? Why do I stay where I'm not really chosen? When she begins to understand that love isn't measured by scraps of attention, but by presence, care, respect, and constancy, something inside her changes. And that's when she begins to realize that perhaps the problem was never that he was like that, but that she accepted it as normal. There's a trap that many women fall into without even realizing it: the absurd fear of being displeased. And do you know how this shows up? In the difficulty of taking a stand, of saying no, of firmly setting emotional boundaries. It's that passive communication where she swallows frogs, keeps quiet, pretends she doesn't care, all to avoid conflict, rejection, or abandonment. But this behavior gradually undermines her self-esteem, feeds her insecurity, and puts emotional dependence in control of the relationship. And do you know what's most cruel? The more she tries to please him, the more she loses her own value in his eyes. Because unfortunately, what is easy, too available, predictable, loses strength, loses impact. And this isn't about playing games or manipulating. It's about self-knowledge, about understanding that pleasing all the time, whatever the cost, doesn't build a healthy relationship. It only reinforces the cycle of emotional sabotage and self-abandonment. Want a practical example? Start with the little things. If he proposes something you don't want, you don't have to accept it just to please him. If you feel uncomfortable with something, you don't have to smile and pretend everything is fine. Learning to express your discomfort, your needs and your desires in a clear, firm, and loving way is the beginning of liberation. Look, this is one of the biggest sources of frustration in love relationships. You know that secret hope that, with love, patience, and understanding, he'll change? Well, that's nothing more than a form of self-sabotage in disguise. The woman creates a character in her head, a man who could be, but in practice doesn't exist. And so she gets caught up in the illusion, ignoring the clear signs of disinterest, toxic behavior, and emotional abandonment. And the most dangerous thing is that she doesn't realize that in trying to change the other person, she loses herself in the process. She loses herself in the process, accepting crumbs, tolerating absence, contempt, and even a lack of respect, all in the hope that one day she will become the partner she idealized. But that day never comes, because no one changes who doesn't want to. And as long as she insists, it's she who's exhausting herself, who's tearing herself apart. Do you want to see this in practice? Think of the time he promised you he would change, and he did for 2 days. Then everything went back to the way it was before. And you, once again, entered the cycle of hope, frustration, and disappointment. The problem isn't that he isn't who you want him to be. The problem is that you insist on trying to make him be. And this movement, as well as exhausting you, prevents you from realizing something even more serious. A disguised attitude that many mistake for love, but which actually destroys any connection. Here lies a great emotional trap that few people realize. Women, dominated by insecurity, fear of rejection, and emotional dependence, begin to believe that to control is to love. And she doesn't even realize that this is emotional sabotage disguised as care. Checking where he is, demanding quick answers, wanting to know who he's talking to, looking at social media. All of this stems from that feeling of emotional abandonment and that internal emptiness that she tries to fill through the other person. What she doesn't realize is that the more she controls, the more she suffocates the relationship. This isn't affection. It isn't love. It's fear. Fear of being left, fear of not being enough, fear of losing. And this toxic behavior, even if she doesn't want it, undermines the connection, wears down the bond, and creates a cycle where the other person withdraws, exactly what she fears most. And then the insecurity grows, and the control increases. It's a never-ending cycle. Do you know what the real antidote to this would be? Self-knowledge, self-love, and emotional security. Because when she understands that healthy love doesn't require vigilance, but trust and space, she begins to break this pattern. And this is the exact point where many people are surprised. Because they realize that, in fact, what they needed most wasn't to control the other person, but to learn to accept themselves, take care of themselves, and fill that space inside them that had been empty for so long. Now that you understand these 5 attitudes that sabotage your relationships, it's time to look inward with courage and start changing what no longer serves you. How many times have you written yourself off in order to please, accepted emotional crumbs, or been afraid to say no for fear of losing someone? Recognizing these patterns is the first step towards transforming your love life and building relationships based on respect, balance, and self-love. Imagine how liberating it would be to live without this cycle of self-sabotage, making room for your true value to flourish and be recognized. Think with me. Which of these behaviors do you see in yourself today? Which ones have kept you stuck in relationships that don't nourish you emotionally? Change begins when you decide to prioritize yourself, protect yourself, and set firm boundaries without guilt. Remember that healthy love begins within us, with self-knowledge and self-worth. You deserve much more than crumbs. You deserve to be a priority, to feel safe, and to build real connections. So how about committing to this transformation now? Apply this knowledge in your daily life, challenge your insecurities and attachments, and watch the magic happen. If you want to continue growing, learning, and strengthening yourself emotionally, be sure to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. That way, you'll always be up to date with content that will help you win the love and respect you deserve, without ever losing your way again.